It was the 24th century, and Earth had finally reached the stars with hope in their hearts and dreams of unity. But that dream turned into chains as soon as they met the other species of the galaxy, who saw humans not as equals, but as tools, and servants and soldiers to be owned and traded and controlled. And so began the dark years when the skies of Earth filled with alien ships and the cities fell one by one, as the leaders were taken and the people were scattered across distant worlds where they were forced to work and fight and die for masters who did not care if they lived or not. But even in the darkest days, there were some who did not forget what it meant to be human. Like Aaron, who had once been a pilot before the fall and now moved among the ruins of old Chicago, gathering what remained of those who still had the will to fight. And Laura, who had been a scientist before the invaders burned the labs and who now worked in the shadows building things that could turn scraps into weapons because she believed that if humans could build cities, once they could build them again. And if they could make peace, once they could make war when it was needed. And as Aaron walked through the streets that were filled with dust and memories, he saw the people hiding in fear, and he knew they were waiting for something that would never come unless someone stood up first. So he stood and spoke of resistance and the need to fight, even when the world said there was no chance of victory. And slowly people began to gather around him because hope was something humans could never truly lose, no matter how deep they were buried under despair. And soon small fires began to light across the city as they built shelters and hidden places, and from those fires came the first plans to strike back not with great armies or fleets, but with courage and will. And with every day that passed, they grew bolder, raiding alien outposts, stealing food and power cells and using them to survive, while Laura worked underground with the hum of broken machines around her and the air thick with smoke, trying to decode the alien technology they had stolen. She was tired and hungry, but her eyes were sharp because she had seen what they did to the children in the camps, and she swore that no child would grow up in chains again. And when Aaron came to her lab to tell her that another raid had failed, she looked at him and said, "It will not matter. We will fail many times. Before we win once, but when we win it will be for everyone." And he nodded because he knew she was right. And outside the wind blew through the ruined towers, carrying the smell of smoke and the promise of rain. And in that moment, Earth was quiet, as if it too was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. And when the rain came, it washed the streets, and the old flags that still hung on broken poles fluttered once more, and people saw them and remembered who they were. And that memory was more powerful than any weapon because it reminded them they were still human, and no one could take that away. And so from the ashes of old cities, the first rebellion was born, led by those who had nothing left to lose and everything to regain. And even though the alien masters laughed from their thrones in the sky, thinking that humans were too weak to rise again, they did not understand that weakness was what had made them strong, that pain was what had made them endure. And as Aaron looked at the faces of the people around him, he felt something he had not felt in years. He felt belief that maybe they could win someday, if they just kept moving, kept building, kept fighting. And he told them that they were not slaves. They were survivors, and they would not die on their knees. And the crowd whispered back his words and then shouted them louder and louder until the whole ruin of the city echoed with the sound of defiance. And somewhere far above in the cold orbit of Earth, alien overseers heard that noise, and for the first time, they felt something they had never felt before when thinking of humans. They felt fear because the humans had stopped crying and started planning. And when a species like that decides to stand, no empire can keep them down forever. And that was how it began. Not with armies or heroes, but with a few people in the ruins of a broken world, deciding that they had been silent for too long, and that silence would end tonight, as the fires of rebellion burned in the dark, and the dawn of a new human spirit rose with them. The rebellion began like a whisper that slowly turned into thunder across the broken lands, and among the scattered colonies, humans began to remember that they were once free, and they wanted to be free again. And though the alien masters sent their enforcers to crush the uprisings, they found that humans were no longer easy to hunt because they had learned the ways of survival in the shadows, and they had learned to fight with anything they could find. Aaron moved from place to place, leading small groups through the ruins and forests, striking where the enemy least expected and disappearing before they could strike back. He was no longer just a man. He was a symbol of defiance, and the people followed him because he never gave up and never asked for anything. He would share his last piece of food with a child or stand in front of a blaster shot to save someone else. And those stories spread faster than fire in dry grass, and soon every human settlement whispered his name like a prayer. Laura, meanwhile, stayed deep beneath the ruins of Denver, where her lab had grown into a maze of tunnels, filled with machines made from stolen alien parts. She worked without rest, turning fragments of alien tech into weapons that humans could use because she knew the only way to fight the enemy was to use their own strength against them. One night Aaron came to see her, his clothes torn and his face covered with dust. He told her that they had managed to take over a small alien outpost, and for the first time they had captured something important, a power core that could supply energy to all her work. She smiled weakly and said, "This will change everything, because now we can build more than just weapons. We can build a future." And he nodded, though his eyes showed the weight of the lives he had lost. Getting it outside, thunder rolled and the sky flashed with light from orbital patrols searching for them. But the humans did not hide. They moved quickly, building shelters and preparing for the next attack. The aliens underestimated them, thinking that humans could never match their strength or their machines. But humans did not fight like them. They did not fight to conquer. They fought to survive. And that made them dangerous. As the months passed, small victories began to spread. The rebels destroyed communication relays, stole supply ships, and freed prisoners from labor camps, and each success inspired another as more humans joined the cause. Aaron began to train them, teaching them how to fight in groups, how to strike fast and vanish before the enemy could react. And Laura worked to give them tools, small drones that could jam sensors, grenades that could pierce shields, and armor made from layered human steel and alien alloy. It was not perfect, but it worked, and that was enough. The aliens grew angry, sending larger forces to crush the humans once and for all. But every time they came, they found empty camps and destroyed convoys and messages, painted on the walls in red, that said "Earth fights back." On one cold night, as Aaron stood on a ridge overlooking the lights of an alien garrison, he thought about what they had lost and what they were still fighting for. He missed the blue sky and the sound of laughter in the streets, but he knew those things could return if they kept going. He gave the signal, and the human fighters moved silently through the dark like ghosts. When the first explosion tore through the garrison, the night lit up and the aliens panicked, running into their own crossfire. It was over in minutes, and when it was done, Aaron stood among the wreckage and said softly, "This is for everyone they took," and the fighters around him bowed their heads for the fallen. The next day he returned to Laura and told her what had happened, and she said, "It is working. They are afraid of us now. And when they fear us, they will make mistakes, and we will win." And he believed her because she had never been wrong before. Soon, they began to plan something bigger, something that would shake the galaxy. They would take back Earth's orbit. They would strike at the heart of alien control. Aaron gathered all the scattered groups, sending messengers across the stars, while Laura worked to build something massive hidden in the tunnels, a weapon that could shut down the enemy ships with a single pulse. It was risky, and they both knew that if it failed, they would lose everything. But failure no longer mattered, because they had already decided that freedom was worth dying for. As they stood together watching the sunrise over the ruins, for the first time in years, they both felt something new. Not just hope, but certainty that the day would come when humans would stand tall again and the stars would belong to them once more. And somewhere out there, the alien rulers looked down upon the small blue planet and realized too late that they had awakened a species that never knew when to surrender. Years had passed since the first sparks of rebellion, and now the humans had become something new. They were no longer scattered survivors hiding in the ruins. They were soldiers, builders, and leaders united by one purpose: to make sure no one could ever enslave them again. The rebellion had grown into a movement that reached far beyond Earth. Small human fleets now moved between the stars, built from stolen parts, and wrecked alien ships turned into war machines by human hands. Aaron had become the commander of the largest of these fleets, known among his people as the Iron Dawn, a name that filled every alien heart with dread when it appeared in the dark of space. He had seen too many battles and lost too many friends, but he had also seen something rise from the ashes of their suffering. a new strength that made humans impossible to break. Laura still worked behind the lines, now leading a vast network of engineers and scientists who turned everything they learned from the enemy into something humans could use. She had created new kinds of weapons, energy shields, and small ships that could fight in asteroid fields or dive into atmospheres without being detected. She had changed the way war was fought, and she had done it, all for one reason: because she knew that victory was the only way to protect the future. One night, Aaron stood at the command deck of his ship watching the stars as messages came in from across the colonies. Every day brought news of another victory, somewhere, and another loss somewhere else. But the tide was turning. Humanity was fighting back harder and faster than anyone believed possible. The alien empires that once ruled half the galaxy began to fear the humans who fought without mercy and rebuilt faster than they could destroy. They called humans cursed. They said that pain made them stronger, that death only made them fight harder, and they were right. The more the aliens tried to crush them, the more humans rose. The battles grew. Larger fleets clashed in the void. Entire worlds burned, and still the humans kept pushing forward. Aaron remembered what Laura had told him long ago, that survival was the first victory, and now they were surviving. Not just surviving, but winning. The aliens who once controlled Earth began to unite under a single alliance to destroy humanity once and for all. They gathered their armadas, their dreadnoughts, their strongest warriors, and they came to finish what they had started. Aaron knew. It was coming, and he knew that when it did, the cost would be terrible. But he also knew that this was their chance to end it forever. He called Laura from the ship, and her tired face appeared on the screen. Surrounded by tools and wires, she told him that she was working on something that could change everything. A new system that would turn their ships invisible to sensors and give them the chance to strike first. He told her that time was running out, and she said, "I know. But if we rush, we fail, and if we fail, we lose everything. So we take our time and make it right." He trusted her because she had never failed before. Weeks later, the first test of her new system took place when the Iron Dawn led a strike against an alien fuel station hidden near the rings of a frozen world. The enemy never saw them coming, and when the humans struck, the station exploded in a storm of light. The message spread across the galaxy that humans now had power. Even the oldest empires could not match, and for the first time in centuries, the balance of power began to shift. Aaron gathered his officers and told them, "This is not about revenge. This is about freedom. We fight. So no child ever knows the chains we wore," and they all swore to fight, until the end. As the human resistance grew, it became something greater. It became the human dominion. No longer just rebels, but a people claiming their place among the stars. They built new cities on liberated worlds. They trained new soldiers. They created schools and families once more, and Laura looked at them and felt proud because she saw that humanity was becoming whole again. But peace was still far away because the alien alliance had sworn that they would never let humans rise there. Fleets began to move toward the solar system again. A storm that would decide the fate of everyone. Aaron stood on the deck of his ship looking at Earth glowing in the distance. And he said quietly, "If they want war, we will give them one. They will learn what it means to fight the species they tried to enslave." And as his fleet formed up in orbit, thousands of ships ready and waiting, he sent one final message across the stars to every human who could hear him: stand together. Fight for your home, for your people, and for the future. The galaxy thinks we should have never been born. We will show them why we survived. And with that, the Iron Dawn and the Human Dominion fleet moved to meet the enemy in the dark, where the fate of all would soon be decided. The war reached its greatest storm when the alien armadas came for Sol, and the skies of Earth filled with fire for 7 days and nights, as the largest fleets in history clashed over the blue planet. The people on the ground looked up and saw streaks of light cutting across the heavens, and they prayed that the humans above would hold the line. Aaron stood on the bridge of the Iron Dawn, watching the battle unfold through the chaos of energy beams and burning ships. His fleet fought like wolves, surrounding larger enemies and striking at their weak points. Every move calculated, every sacrifice weighed. He could hear the voices of his officers calling out damage reports and enemy movements. But in his heart he felt only one thing: determination, because this was the battle that would decide everything far below on Earth. Laura was deep inside Horizon Gate. a massive orbital ring rebuilt from alien wreckage that now served as humanity's strongest fortress. She had spent years preparing for this moment, and now her final creation was ready. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of control, a device that could bend gravity itself, tearing enemy ships apart or pulling them from orbit. She called it the Heart of Earth, and it was humanity's last hope. Outside, the battle grew worse by the hour. Alien dreadnoughts pushed closer to the planet, raining fire down on the defenses. Whole sections of the orbital ring were breaking apart, but still the humans held on. Every pilot, every soldier, every engineer fought with everything they had because they all knew what would happen if they failed. They had seen their worlds burned before, and they would never let it happen again. Aaron gave the order for the Iron Dawn to charge straight into the center of the enemy formation. It was madness, but he knew that if they could break the command ships, the rest would fall into chaos. The Iron Dawn roared forward, weapons, blazing shields burning bright as it tore through waves of enemy fighters. Laura watched the readings on her console as the battle reached its breaking point, and she whispered to herself, "It has to work." She activated the Heart of Earth, and for a moment, everything went silent. Then the stars seemed to twist as gravity bent. The alien fleet began to break apart, ships colliding as their drives failed the pull of Earth, dragging them down into fire and light. Aaron saw it happen from his viewport, and for the first time he smiled because he knew Laura had done it. The aliens tried to retreat, but it was too late. The humans pressed the attack, forcing them back across the void. One ship after another fell until only wrecks and silence remained. When it was over, the skies were full of debris and smoke, but Earth was still there, scarred but free. Aaron walked through the battered halls of the Iron Dawn, looking at the faces of his crew. They were exhausted, bleeding, and proud. He told them quietly, "We did it, not for revenge, but for the right to live our own way," and they nodded because they understood the war was not finished, but the tide had turned forever on Earth. Laura stepped out from the control room into the light of a new day, the first real sunrise she had seen in years, and she felt tears on her face because she knew that this day belonged to all of them. The aliens who had once ruled the stars now sent desperate signals asking for peace, but the humans did not answer. Not yet. They remembered the camps, the chains, the screams. They remembered what it had felt like to be helpless, and they wanted to make sure no one would ever forget what humanity had endured across the stars. The message spread: the humans had won the battle for Earth. The unbreakable had risen from the ashes, and the empires trembled. Aaron stood on the observation deck as the planet turned slowly below, and he thought of all the lives lost, all the friends gone, and he whispered to himself, "It is not over until every chain is broken." And he knew that soon they would take the war beyond Earth. They would bring it to the worlds that had once enslaved them, and they would make the galaxy understand that humanity was no longer the hunted but the storm. And as the ships of the human Dominion gathered once more, ready to move into the unknown, every soldier, every pilot, every citizen looked to the stars and knew that they were not fighting for vengeance but for freedom, and that was something no empire could ever destroy. Years after the Great War, the galaxy had changed. The fires of battle had faded, but their marks remained on every world and in every heart, and where once the alien empires had ruled with pride, now their cities lay in silence, and their leaders bowed their heads in shame. The humans who had once been slaves now stood as the rulers, not by cruelty, but by strength of will and memory. Aaron walked through the great hall of the Earth Council, built from the ruins of old cities and filled with the flags of every world that had joined the human dominion. He had lived through the years of darkness and had seen the birth of light again, and he carried the weight of all those who had fallen to make it possible. The council chamber was quiet as the envoys from dozens of alien worlds came forward to offer tribute and allegiance. Some came out of fear, others out of hope, but all came because they knew humanity could no longer be ignored. They had tried to break the humans, and now they stood before them asking for mercy. Laura sat beside him, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes still sharp. She had given her life to building the future, and now she watched it take shape before her. She remembered the cold tunnels of Denver, the broken machines, the hunger and the fear, and she smiled because it had all been worth it. The galaxy had learned that humans were not to be enslaved. They were to be respected. Aaron rose from his seat and looked around at the gathered species. He spoke with calm strength, telling them that the age of chains was over, that no species would ever again rule another, that the human dominion would not be built on conquest, but on balance and peace. Yet everyone in the room knew that peace existed only because humanity held the power to enforce it after the meeting. Aaron walked outside onto the balcony overlooking the rebuilt city below. It was strange to see life again. People laughing, children running, traders shouting. It was the sound of a world alive. Laura joined him and said, "It feels strange, doesn't it? We dreamed of this for so long and now it is real." He nodded but said it came at a cost. "We lost too many." She touched his arm and said, "They did not die for nothing. They gave us this and we will protect it." He looked up at the sky where human ships patrolled among the stars and said, "They are watching us. Every empire that still exists, they watch and wait to see if we become what they were." She smiled and said, "Then we must prove we are different." He thought for a moment and said, "Maybe that is what it means to be human, to remember and to choose better." Every time beyond Earth, the human dominion stretched across the stars. They rebuilt planets, freed slaves, and opened the old trade routes once ruled by alien kings, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy knew fairness. Even the species that had once been cruel began to change under the watch of humanity. They worked together, sharing knowledge instead of hoarding it, and building instead of destroying it. Was not perfect, but it was better than anything that had come before. One evening, Aaron visited the memorial built on the plains of Kansas, where the names of every human who had died in the wars were carved into stone walls that stretched for miles. He walked slowly, touching the names with his hand, and whispering to them that their struggle had not been forgotten, that their courage had built a new world. As he stood there, he saw children running through the fields, their laughter echoing in the wind, and he thought, maybe this was what victory truly meant. Not power, not glory, but peace. For those who would come after Laura joined him, and they stood together as the sun set, turning the sky golden and red. She said quietly, "They will tell our story one day," and he answered, "No. They will tell humanity's story because it belongs to everyone, not just to us." She smiled and said, "Then let it be a story of mercy, not of hate." And he nodded because he knew that was what they needed most, mercy for themselves and for those who had once been their enemies. And as night fell, the stars came out bright and endless across the sky, the same stars that had once been a prison, now a promise. The galaxy whispered of Earth, now calling it the heart of the new order. The world that had been broken and rebuilt by will alone. The world that had taught every other species what it meant to fight for freedom and to forgive. Aaron and Laura stood together watching the stars until the horizon darkened and the lights of the cities below began to glow. They said nothing more because there was nothing left to say. The war was over. The chains were gone, and the galaxy had learned that no matter how many times humans are struck down, they always rise again, and now every species that had once tried to enslave Earth knelt before it, not out of fear, but out of respect and awe, because humanity had shown them what true strength was, and the story of that strength would live forever.